G'day everyone, my name's Leigh and I'm a professional poker player from Melbourne, Australia, and about a year ago I started a YouTube channel to track my progress as a poker player. I started off as a live 2-5 grinder, but because of coronavirus and the Crown Casino shutting their doors, I made the transition to online poker. At the moment I'm grinding 100 NL 9max games, and I'm just covering my progress in this vlog series. It is hot as hell today in Melbourne, and unfortunately I can't run the air conditioner and record a vlog at the same time, not with good audio at least, but because it's so hot I'm gonna try and get this thing out early in the morning. So let's not waste any more time and start getting into the session. So here we go, here's a session that I played, and let's start out with the positives. As you can see, I did play a total of 1,684 hands, which I am absolutely stoked with. My goal on any given day is going to be to play 1,500 hands of poker, so to hit over the 1,600 hand mark, I'm absolutely stoked with. That's what I'm aiming for. As you can see, did not run the best in this session, and my hot streak is over because I did end up losing 376 across this session. But even though the hot streak's over, I can't be too disappointed unless the reason this loss is so big is because of mistakes I've made, and we're going to get into how I played. I've picked out some of the most interesting hands I played across this session, which really do paint that picture of where my gameplay was at for the session. So let's go get into those hand histories and see how I played. Let's kick things off with pocket tens in middle position. I go ahead and open it up to 3, then the action gets to a tight aggressive cutoff. They go ahead and 3-bet me to 12. Then the action gets back to me here, and I decide to just call just because my opponent is a tighter 3-better. If it was a looser opponent that I thought might be mixing in more light 3-bets, then I definitely would consider mixing in the 4-bet with 10s, but against this opponent type, I just call. Then we go heads up to a flop, 7-5-3 with 2 diamonds, so we still have an overpair to the board. I go ahead and check it over to the 3-better. Then they go ahead and c-bet 17. I think we have a pretty easy decision to call on this street. Again, against a tight opponent, I don't want to go ahead and raise that bet because I think I'm only going to get action from stronger hands, and if my opponent is semi-bluffing with a hand like ace-king or ace-queen, we're ahead of that, so we can't fold quite yet, so I throw in the call. Then we get to see a turn. Turn's the ace of clubs, not the best card in the world for us. We do lose to those ace-king, ace-queen hands now, so I go and check it over to the pre-flop 3-better, and then they check back, which I think is pretty interesting. Whilst I do think they might be checking back an ace-king or an ace-queen sometimes, I think a lot of those hands are going to want to bet off when there are 2 flush draws on the board, and they're going to know that I have a lot of flush draws that are going to call on the flop here. I think it's more likely that their range has one of the overpairs that is like pocket kings, pocket queens, pocket jacks. They're checking back because the ace is going to be a scare card for those hands. They're going to know I have hands like ace jack of diamonds, ace queen of diamonds in my range, so they could be checking it back for those reasons with those hands. So when the river is the 8 of diamonds, it's a pretty interesting one here, because if my opponent does have pocket kings, pocket queens, I think I can bluff them off it if I bet really big here. If I bet really big here, I can very credibly represent a flush. And because their range is sort of weighted more towards those weaker hands, and I don't think they would check ace-king or ace-queen on the turn, I think it's a good spot to go ahead and bluff them off of one of those hands. So I actually go ahead and bet the size of the pot here. And I will say, in regards to my hand selection, I don't know if pocket tens is the best hand to use just because it does have showdown value, and if my opponent does hero call with one of those like pocket jacks, for example, I'm completely value owning myself with a bet here. Plus, it's not impossible that they do have the nut flush themselves. That might be a hand they check on the turn. It's one of their stronger hands, but I'm going for the bluff. I'm trying to get them off of those middling strength hands. I bet the size of the pot, and then my opponent throws in the call. That's bad news. And we do get to see what they had, and they did have ace-king, so they actually did make a check on the river with one of those stronger hands, and I don't think I'm ever going to be able to bluff them off of that hand specifically when they do check the turn, so pretty unlucky to run into the top of their range here. In terms of my bluff, if they did have pocket kings or queens, I don't know if it would work or not. Hop in the comments below. Do you think they'd call off with pocket kings there? Let me know. Next up, the action falls to us on the button with Jack 10 offsuit. I go ahead and open it up to 3. Then the action gets to a tight aggressive big blind, and they 3-bet it to 10. I think I have a pretty interesting decision pre-flop. I definitely could just see going ahead and folding here as a fine play. My opponent is tight aggressive, so they're probably going to have a stronger range of hands here than a typical big blind 3-bet would have. I think calling's a better option though, and it's just because I'm actually getting a really good price to call and play the pot in position. My opponent chose a relatively small 3-bet size out of position, so when someone does that, you're definitely going to want to take a pot in position. And even though Jack 10 suited, it's not the strongest hand in my range, it's not the worst either. I'm going to be opening this button a lot with a tight player in the big blind, so I'm going to have a lot of like Queen 2 suited, even like 7-6 offsuit, so I'd rather have Jack 10 offsuit than those hands. So I do throw in the call here. Let me know what you think in the comments if that's a bit too loose or not. And we go heads up to a flop. That is a banger flop. It is Jack 10 for rainbow, so we do make top 2 pair, and then things get better because the big blind bets out for 12. We have another interesting decision, whether we want to raise for value or just call, mix in a bit of a trap. The reasons I would like raising are essentially to try and stack an overpair. I think if we raise here, we're more likely to do that against, if my opponent has pocket aces, we're probably going to get stacks in at this point if we raise now. There's benefits to trapping as well though, and it's mainly if my opponent is semi-bluffing with a hand like ace-king, ace-queen, maybe even like ace-5 suited that has a backdoor flush draw. If they're bluffing with one of those hands, we can get more value by letting them barrel off on multiple streets. The fact that my opponent probably will keep barreling with a lot of the overpairs in their range on future streets, it sort of does negate the benefit of us raising now to try and get more value from them. So ultimately, because of that, I do decide to just call here, although I think both options are fine plays. So we get to see a turn. The turn's the 7 of diamonds, pretty big brick, except for it puts out backdoor diamonds. And then the 3-better keeps betting at it. They go ahead and make it 27. I think at this point I have to raise for value. It will look really strong here when I do raise, particularly since 8-9 did make a straight on this turn card, but I just have to try and get max value from the overpairs in my opponent's range. So I go ahead and effectively put them all in, and then my opponent calls. So we're loving that news. And the river's a king, could be a bad card for us if my opponent has pocket kings, but we get to see what they have, and it was pocket aces, so no good there. We sucked out on them when we hit 2 pair on the flop, and we're going to scoop a pretty big pot there. Next hand, the action gets to a loose aggressive player in the cutoff. They go ahead and open it up to 4 straight away. The action gets to me in the small blind with ace-jack offsuit, and I will say there is absolutely merit to just folding here. Typically when opponents use a larger size to open, it can be indicative that they have a strong range of hands. Having said that, this opponent is loose aggressive, and I've seen them do this with some pretty junky hands before, even in early position. So the fact that they're in late position, I think they're going to be very wide here, and I can absolutely 3-bet for value with a hand as strong as ace-jack. So I go ahead and make it 20, which is a larger sizing, which makes sense, A, because I think my opponent's going to call the 3-bet really wide, but B, we are really deep effective, over 170 big blinds, so I can get a lot of value by raising up here. I make it 20, and then the cutoff does call. So it heads up to a flop, king 5-4 with 2 clubs, so pretty big whiff for us. Having said that though, I still like c-bet bluffing here, just because we can very credibly represent ace-king, pocket aces, king-queen here, and I think we're going to get a lot of folds from hands like Jack 10 and 10-9, but even if we don't get folds from those hands, we're getting a little bit of thin value with ace high. I think it's a good spot for us to c-bet. I go ahead and make it 15, and then the villain calls. So we get to see the turn, which is 2 of diamonds. Pretty interesting turn card. We do turn a gut shot now. We can hit a 3 and make a straight on the river. So for that reason, it's a good turn card for us, and I actually see a lot of merit in continuing to bluff here. Not only did we pick up backdoor equity, but I still think my opponent is going to have a bunch of pocket pairs in their range between like pocket 6s and pocket jacks even. They might 4-bet jacks because they are pretty aggressive, but like pocket 10s through pocket 6s for sure, that they're just going to fold if we keep barreling here. And again, even though we only have ace high, we can get a bit of thin value from flush draws like Jack 10 of clubs, stuff like that. So I decide to keep barreling at it. I go ahead and bet 42, which I feel like is probably the smallest bet that can make my opponent fold a hand like pocket 9s. So I go ahead and bet 42, and then my opponent calls. So we get to see the river. We're hoping it's a 3 or an ace because the chances we're behind are pretty likely. I think my opponent's going to have a lot of kings in their range and a few flush draws as well. So the river is the 7 of clubs. This river card is really bad, which kind of makes me just want to give up. My opponent is absolutely going to have a lot of flushes in this spot, which we're never going to be able to bluff them off of. I do think if we used a larger bluff side, we might be able to get them off one of those kings that they were planning on calling down with, just because this river's going to be a scare card for those hands. Having said that though, I would rather do that if I had the ace of clubs or the jack of clubs, just because that's going to block the amount of combinations of flushes my opponent can potentially have. So because of that, I think they're going to have a flush more often, so I'm going to be more hesitant about putting in the third bullet. So I do decide to check. Then my opponent checks back, and we get to see what they have, and it was 4-3 of hearts. I had bottom pair on the flop, and they turned a straight draw, so that's absolutely a hand they would have folded if I bet out, so pretty disappointed that I didn't put in the third bullet. I just didn't think my opponent would have many hands this week on the turn. Next hand, the action gets to a tight aggressive button, who goes ahead and opens it up to 3. Then a tight passive player in the small blind decides to call. Then I'm in the big blind with a 7 suited. I think I have a pretty easy decision to call here. Some merit to 3-betting to try and mix in a bit of a squeeze play, but these suited aces hands play so well in multi-way pots because you're going to flush over flush people more often, so I'd rather just take my price and get to see some post-flop action, so I throw in the call. So we go 3 ways to a flop, 7-4 deuce with 2 diamonds. And then things get interesting. The small blind player actually decides to lead out for 6. The action's on me here. With top pair, top kicker, I think it's a good spot to go ahead and call. My opponent could be leading out with a flush draw or a worse pair. I don't want to raise though when the original raiser is still yet to act, just because they're going to have a lot of overpairs in their range, and by raising here, kind of value owning myself a bit. So I decide to throw in the call, and then the pre-flop raiser folds. So we go heads up with the small blind to the turn, which is the 3 of hearts. They check it over to me. I definitely want to go ahead and bet here. My opponent definitely could have led out with a flush draw, which is going to have a lot of equity against me, but I am still ahead, so I want to get value from it. I can get value from worse 7s as well that decided to lead out. I go ahead and bet 18, and then my opponent throws in the call. So that's good news so far. So we see the river, it's the jack of spades, the front door flush draw does mix. The passive player checks it over to me now, and now in this spot, I really think I should be checking back. If my opponent has a worse 7, I really think they're going to fold on this river. The reason that I think checking back is the best play is just because my opponent is a tight passive player, so I really can't see them calling a bet with a worse hand, and they do have stronger hands in their range. They could have pocket 8s, pocket 9s that called in the small blind and then decided to lead out for a bit of protection. So I really think playing it passive and just checking back here is the best play. I don't do that though. I decide to go for a bit of thin value. I think this is a pretty silly mistake in all honesty, and kicking myself for being a bit too greedy going for that thin value. So I go ahead and bet 33. Then the small blind does call, and they have pocket 10s. So yeah, way too thin to go for 2 barrels there with the flop top pair. Kicking myself for that mistake. Next hand, we get a loose passive player limping under the gun, and then another loose passive player with a really short stack limps to my direct right. And I'm in the low jack with ace queen offsuit. Great spot to ISO raise against the passive players. I go ahead and make it at 5.5. Then I get a call from a loose aggressive small blind, and then both the limpers call as well. So very multi-way here to a flop of 9-5 deuce rainbow. When the action checks over to me, I just think I have a very easy decision to check back here. We have a bit of showdown value with ace high, and I'm very concerned that these passive opponents are going to call a bet with any pair, and I'm just not really looking to invest that when I think I'm going to get called by better hands. So I check it. We get to see a turn. Turn's a good one for us. It is the ace of spades. The action checks over to the short stack, and they go ahead and bet 5. I think this is a pretty interesting decision, whether we want to just call or raise. The reasons I like raising here are we can effectively go all in against the short stack. So if we raise to like 30, they're probably going to call off with worse aces in their range. It can be a bit dicey though when there's still people to act. If we go ahead and raise 30 here, and then the small blind ends up folding ace jack, which I think they might do, we've lost a bit of value there ourselves. So really not looking to do that too much. So I do throw in the call. Hop in the comments, let me know if you would raise or call in this spot. I didn't raise, but someone else steals the idea. The small blind decides to raise it up to 51. Under the gun folds, and the short stack folds as well. The action's back on me here, and this is pretty gross. I do think the small blind is going to have a lot of stronger hands in their range. They can definitely have ace 9, ace 5 suited. They definitely could have slow played a set on the flop. Like naturally, they're going to check an ace turn to the pre-flop aggressor to mix in this check raise. The only thing that really tempts me to call here is that they are a loose aggressive opponent, and they do have a few hands with equity that they could use as semi-bluff, like 6-7, 7-8. I get a bit tempted just because of this person's table image, and I do throw in the call. So it heads up to the river. It's a king of clubs, and then the small blind effectively puts me all in here. Awful spot here. I really do wish I just folded the turn, because this river doesn't really change much, except for it makes my range look even stronger. I really do think my opponent could have flopped a set here. Cold calling a big bet in the small blind, that just reeks of they tried to set mine with pocket fives or pocket twos. I really think that this line looks so strong, and I can't think of that many natural bluffs they would use, so I do decide to go ahead and fold. I really wish I just folded on the turn. Next hand, I am under the gun with ace king of diamonds. I go ahead and open it up to 3. Then a tight aggressive player in the +2 position goes ahead and 3-bets us to 9.5. The action gets back to me here, and I think we do have a pretty interesting decision whether we want to just call or go ahead and 4-bet. An early position versus early position 3-bet hand, it's going to be a very, very strong range of hands, and the fact my opponent is tight aggressive, that makes me think that they're even stronger than a player conventionally would be here. So for that reason, calling here, playing a bit of pot control and protecting my calling range with a really strong hand like ace king suited makes sense. But even if my opponent does have a really strong range of hands, it's like pocket jacks plus, ace king, ace queen suited, then we're actually ahead of that range. We can get a bit of thin value by 4-betting here. So because of that, I do decide to 4-bet here, although I do think there is merit to just calling in this super tight dynamic as well. I go ahead and make it 24. Then the action's back on the tight aggressive player, and they mix in the 5-bet. They go ahead and make it 45.5. The action's back on me here, and this is a pretty gross spot. They could be using a hand like ace queen suited as a 5-bet bluff, but they're definitely going to have all the combinations of pocket kings and pocket aces. I even think with a hand like pocket queens or ace king, they're probably just going to call my 4-bet in position, particularly getting a price. So their 5-bet does look really, really strong. It is a really, really cheap price for us to call, so I can't quite fold just yet, but I'm really, really hating this situation. I throw in the call though, getting such a good price. If my opponent went a bit bigger, I would definitely be more tempted to fold, just because I do think they are so strong. We get to see a flop. It is Jack 10-6 with 2 clubs. I check it over to the villain. They go ahead and c-bet 45. There is some merit to floating on this flop. We do have a gut shot to the nuts and a lot of implied odds if we hit that. Having said that though, my opponent bet really, really big in a 5-bet pot, and I'm just not getting a good price. The SPR is going to be less than 1 on the turn if I do call, so I'm not getting the right odds to draw, particularly when my opponent's going to have a lot of pocket aces and pocket kings in their range. So even if I do hit a king on the turn, for example, my opponent's still going to have all the combinations of pocket aces in their range, and I'm still going to lose. So I do decide to fold. I would fold if my opponent bet smaller, but they bet too big on the flop, and I just have to get out of there with that one. Okay, so this is going to be the last hand we cover from the session, and I left the best for last. So the action gets to a very fun player in the hijack. They go ahead and open limp. I call them a very fun player just because I've seen them go all in probably like 10 times now, and they've had a wide range of speculative holdings so far. As you can see, they have a big stack, so they've been running pretty hot. So they go ahead and open limp. Then the action's on me on the button with a7 suited. I definitely want to ISO raise here. I go ahead and make it 5, which is my standard ISO raise. I will say, against a very fun player who's pretty much going to call 100% of the time when they limp, I do think there is merit to raising a larger size, just because you're going to get more value from that range. Having said that though, if either the small blind or the big blind are thinking players and notice you doing this, they're probably going to be mixing in a lot of 3-bets, which is going to be a massive pain in your ass when you do have more speculative holdings like a7 suited. There's pros and cons to either way. I decide to keep it normal and go to 5. Then I get a call from a loose passive small blind, and the original limper calls as well. So we go 3 ways to a flop. Jack 4-3 rainbow. The action checks to me here, and I think the best play here is just to check back. Whilst we could get a bit of thin value from ace high from the fun player in particular, multi-way, it's a bit too dicey. Pretty much both of these opponents are going to call with any pair. I'd rather just check and take a free turn, which is what I do. We get to see a turn, 6 diamonds, great turn card for us. We turn a combo draw. The small blind leads out for 6.5. The fun player calls. Some merit to semi-bluff raising here, but I think again, taking a more passive line and just calling is the best play in this instance. If we get there on the river with a diamond, I think we're going to flush over flush one of these players like very, very often, and we are very deep, so that's going to be an absolute dream situation for us. If we do raise, I just think we're going to get called by a bunch of stronger hands. Like any pair and a 5 is a straight draw. So there's just a lot of hands that are going to call that are better than ours. So I don't really want to value own myself. So I throw in the call. So we get to see the river. The river's beautiful. It's 5 of clubs. We do make a straight. Small blind bets again. Tiny though. They go ahead and make it 6. The action gets to the fun player. They go ahead and raise it up to 24. So we're loving things that are developing here. I definitely think that this player I actually think they could beat bluffing just because they are so aggressive and willing to get in light. They definitely have a bunch of 2 pairs and they could have a straight themselves, either the same one as us or a worse one in their range here. So I absolutely think there's merit to us raising for value. I can't see this opponent folding 2 pair even on this run out. So I go ahead and make it 72. Then the action gets to the small blind and they fold. And the action's back to the fun player and they rip it all in. I do think the chances that we're chopping with villain are very, very likely here. But they are so crazy that they could be doing this with like a set or 2 pair, even a bluff. I do decide to throw in the call, and then my opponent shows 8-7 offsuit. So they had the nuts, they had the better straight. Oh, that is so sick. At the time, I was sort of like thinking, did I overvalue my hand by, raising and then calling off? And it's so hard to say against these crazy opponents. Would they overvalue 2 pair or a set? It's so hard to say. And after this point, I sort of closed a few of the tables I was playing on just because this did tilt me a bit. You shouldn't be affected by results or getting called in such a way, but I was so had a vendetta against this player from the point on in the session that I just wanted to focus on trying to get my money back from them, which is a pretty toxic mind state to have when you're playing poker. You shouldn't be trying to get in a grudge match with people, trying to win back money and stuff. You should just be playing good poker, regardless if you're winning or losing, who you're winning off, who you're losing to. And, I just felt really silly for my gameplay going forward from this point, so I only played another half hour or so before this player left the table. Just stuck there and played next to them for the whole time. I think my response to the cooler in this situation wasn't great for the session moving forward, and we'll get more into what I mean by that when we go over my gameplay grade. So there you go, those were the most interesting hands I played across the session, and I really do feel like they give a good scope of how I played during the session. So for my gameplay grade today, I'm going to go with a C. I'm pretty disappointed with a lot of the decisions I made. You saw some of them. That wasn't that bad. I wouldn't quite go to a C grade level because of that. It really is because at the end of the session, I just got in a vendetta with this random player who probably didn't even care about me at all, and I was sort of just trying to win my money back with them. I didn't go too crazy with it. I wasn't overly aggressive, calling too wide, because you do want to be calling wider against opponents like that. And so I wasn't that disappointed with my play, but it's just the fact that I had to shut down other tables and it cost me a bit of volume. I still had good volume today, but it could have been even better. So yeah, it's just a distracting thing. I should know better than to get tilted by losses, to get in random vendettas with random people, and I absolutely have to downgrade myself for it. So I'm going to land on a C for today. Okay, so that's going to wrap up the session for today. We got Bear here to say goodbye to everyone. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end of the video. I really do appreciate you sticking to the end. It does help the channel's analytics. If you think Bear looks cute or he just looks grumpy, hit that like button and also subscribe to the channel. Putting out vlogs every single week going over these poker hands, so make sure you subscribe to get the content. And if you haven't already, go follow me over on Instagram at Leigh Bets. I put my session results, volume, and interactive hand histories on there, so it's all really, really good stuff. But for now, I got to put Bear down, and I'm out of here. Peace.